Butcher Cook here. Welcome to session number 31 of Mastering Mandelbulb3D Formulas. So in the last session, we kind of left it at we had set up a DEcombinate scenario where we have two sequences of two formulas each. All right, and the sequences are demarcated at 2. All right, so formula 1 and 2 is the one sequence, formula 3 and 4 is the other sequence. In DEcombinate, you only have two sequences. It's just where you actually divide the sequence by this value. All right, now we wanted to talk about this Maxits part 1 and Maxits part 2. We wanted to actually experiment with it and see what happens. Now, formula 1, we have the comma IFS, which is this object right here. All right. Formula 2, we have the box IFS. Formula number 3, we have the columns. You can just kind of see it in there. All right. And formula 4, we have the tiling IFS. So the box and the comma are sequence number 1. The columns and the tiling are sequence number 2. All right, now let's play with this. All right, if I take formula sequence or part or set number 1, and let's say that's 60 now. So what that's saying is 60 is the maximum number of iterations that the set will be allowed to do. We're not talking about this iteration count up here. That iteration count is the number of iterations for the formula. And at some point way back in the past, I had mentioned that a dIFS shape formula typically only ever needs one iteration to create an object on the screen. Okay? Let's get down here. Let's experiment here, and let's set this max iterations down to 30. And what I'm doing here is I'm telling the DEcombinate formula set number 1 to have a maximum number of iterations of 30. Let's hit it and find out. Now that's the box and this graphic right here. So we see here that the box and the comma graphic were able to complete well within 60 iterations. So let's knock this down. Let's cut it in half again. Okay, watch the box and this object right here. Okay, I see something going on there. Let's knock it down to 10. Okay, watch these two objects here. Okay, still, those objects are able to completely draw on the screen within 10 iterations of the set. Let's knock it down to 5. All right. Okay, let's knock it down to 1. Ah, good. Now you see part of this comma graphic is not drawing. And I think we'd also find that part of this box isn't drawing because there's still some elements of this graphic out in here that we don't see anymore. Okay, but what we've shown here is that a hybrid, a max iterations of the formula set number 1 have been constrained to one iteration, and we're losing part of the graphic. And that's what we want. That's what we want. Let's put a 2 in there, and we should start getting some of this. Okay, good. Some of this graphic is coming back, but not all of it. Let's put a 3 in there. Okay. Now we're going to get a little bit more graphic right in here. There it comes. All right, let's put a 4 in there. Okay, there's a little bit more graphic. Now, what's key here is if you've been watching the screen draw, what the key part of this is, you'll note that the tile and the columns graphics never changed because they're part of the second formula sequence of the DEcombinate configuration, and I didn't modify this 60 down here. That's the max iterations for part 2 or the second sequence. So those objects, those fractal objects, did not change on the screen. But let's go ahead and change them. So I'm going to knock this way down to 4. Now keep an eye on this tiling and the columns deep down in here, and I think we're going to find that those will be dramatically changed. Yeah, I would say so. We got to a point where the iterations of the formula sets was so limited that it couldn't even draw the colors. Let's knock that down to 3. Okay, let's knock that down to 2. There we go. So 2 iterations. Some of the columns can display, but the tiling couldn't be completed in 2 iterations. Okay, so what this means is that the Maxits for the first sequence and the Maxits for the second sequence have a role in how much of the graphic will actually display on the screen. If you don't have enough iterations for each of the formula sets, the object can't fully form on the screen. And you may not want it to fully form on the screen. You may actually intend to have the Mandelbulb graphic not fully form on the screen. All right. All right. So let's put that back to 60, and let's get our bearings here. All right. All right. Now everybody fully renders. So we know from our experimentation that it does not take 60 iterations to form all these graphics on the screen. 60 is the maximum number of iterations that the Mandelbulb3D application will allow. That does not mean that you are forcing the graphic to run, the formula to run 60 times. It simply means that the graphic cannot run more than 60 times. All right? It's like coming up here and changing the iteration count for the formula. I could put in there 10,000, and if it doesn't need to run the formula 10,000 times to complete the formula, to complete the display of the formula, it's not going to run 10,000 times. Just because I tell it 10,000 doesn't mean it's going to run the formula 10,000 times. Now that's true down here. These are the maximum. It's not going to run each sequence, in this case, more than 60 times. If I was to come up here and if I was to say, I want you to run, I'm going to put a minimum iterations of 30 in there. Now I'm telling it, you have to run 30 times. Let's punch it and see what happens. All right, I'm getting exactly the same visual on the screen. It took longer to render. What I've told Mandelbulb here basically is I want it, that whole screen could fully form with one iteration. I came in here and I said, no, 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 minimum of 30 iterations. All I did is I told the application, write the screen 30 times. And I'm just wasting time because it doesn't need 30 iterations to run each of the formula sets or sequences or parts. It only needs one. If I tell it 30 as minimum, it will do 30, but it's just a waste of time. Okay? So 1. All right? All right, is this making sense to you? All right? All right, let's end this session here, and we'll continue this in the next session. I'll see you there.